Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to be taking a look at Arpache SX, which is one of the two arpeggiators which is available as a MIDI effect in Cubase Pro and Cubase Artist. I'm not sure which version it got introduced into Cubase Artist. It may always have been around, but certainly it's present in the current one and probably has been for some few versions. In terms of setup in Cubase, I've got an instrument track here, which has just got a Hallian Sonic 7 with accented saw, which is one of the factory patches. It's just a pretty straightforward synth sound. It's got no arpeggiation built into it, so this is all going to be happening in our MIDI effect. And it's as a MIDI insert. So you can see the MIDI insert section here. If you haven't got that visible on an instrument track, you click the cog and then make sure that MIDI inserts is ticked. And then you can just click here and you can see there's a variety of effects available. Arpache SX is the one we're interested in. Maybe we'll look at some of the others in the future. So here you can see I've already got one inserted. And this is the default. So when you play any chords, we can see we get that classic arpeggiator sound. So it's fortunate that it's set by default to something useful and musical that you can start playing around with, which isn't always the case with certainly all Steinberg plugins. So we're just going to take a quick tour of the features of classic mode, and then we're going to look at sequence mode because there's actually more to this than a typical arpeggiator. So all of the controls are fairly straightforward in this mode. So we've got direction, so you can see we've got a huge list of different directions. So we've got up, down, up and down, and so on. Now, sometimes, depending on how you play this may not necessarily be apparent what's happening. So straight away, we're going to look at one-shot mode because what this does is this isolates just a single play of any particular arpeggiator pattern. So if you turn this on, in this MIDI part here, I've just got a 4-note chord. So all we've got here is a 3-note, really, because it's a C and then it's double there. So it's just a C major chord. We've got C, E, and G, and then a C on top. Now, if I play this back in one-shot mode, we'll hear just one play of any particular arpeggio. And that's it. So that's what up sounds like. Down will sound like this. Up and down. You get the idea. If you're wondering what all of these do, or maybe how long they are, because when they're playing at the default tempo of 120, etc., and they're on 16th, it can be a little difficult to really understand where the pattern starts and ends, particularly depending on which notes you've played in. Because if you've only played a couple in, it may behave in a way which it's not that easy to understand what's going on. So if we put it on Trillo, simple up 1, we hear that pattern, and you can understand what's going on. So I think this is a good way to approach understanding what these different arpeggiator patterns are and what they do. While we're here, we're going to look at step size and length. So step size is how fast it plays through the arpeggio. So if we change it to 8, we'll get exactly the same pattern, but it will last longer. If we change it to 30 seconds, as you can imagine, it's going to be twice as fast as it originally was, 4 times as fast as we've just heard. Now, a lot of these patterns take on a different identity if you play them fast enough, depending on the sound that you're using, etc. So step size is quite useful to play around. Now, you can put it on PPQ, and then you can set it to exactly the pulses per quarter note that you need. So if you want a weird size, or an unusual size, or you want it to do something which isn't provided for by the standard note durations, you can click that and then put that in there. I'm going to put this back on 16ths. And then length. So this is the note length for each note that gets played. So by default, this will be 16ths, the same as that. It fills up all the gaps. So you can hear that here. There's no space in this. If we make it shorter, there'll be a staccato element to it. If we make it longer, it will be more than legato. They will overlap. So again, that can be nice, particularly if you're playing maybe a guitar sound, something like that, and trying to make it sound a bit more like an arpeggio played by an actual guitarist. Max Polyphony controls how many notes in the arpeggio get played. Now, I'm going to take it out of one-shot mode because it seems to have a bit of an issue with this. There are a few, let's say, idiosyncrasies about this. So I'm going to take it out of one-shot mode purely because I found that playing live, when I try and do this, it doesn't seem to work for whatever reason. It's probably my ham-fisted keyboard playing, to be fair, but you may find that you have the same problem. So I'm just going to put this on all. So there you can hear all of the notes of the C major 7 I'm playing because I'm playing C, E, G, and B. They're all represented in there. Now, if we restrict this, so if we drag this along to maybe 3, so here the polyphony is 3, it's not going to play this B note at the top. So it's playing the same as if I've played those 3 notes. So that note's getting ignored. This is something you might find useful if you're trying to use this live to create something and maybe you're playing too many notes, or you want to simplify the pattern or make sure that it sticks to a certain repeat in terms of the rhythm. So max polyphony can be pretty useful. Now, we're going to go back to one-shot mode because I'm going to stop playing live. Now, this you might find useful. The default is note lowest, which makes sense to me because when you play the notes, generally you're going to be playing them all in a big block and you want them to be counted from the bottom. Otherwise, you have to start working in a weird way. But we can see here we're on note lowest. If I play this with a one shot, we just get that from the bottom to the top because we're in up mode here and note lowest. But if you change this to note highest, we effectively get down because the sort order has changed. So these two actually interact with each other. You can do it by velocity. So if you've hit a note really hard, that will be the first one to be counted, or vice versa, first in and last in. So this is in terms of timing. Now, I definitely don't have the keyboard skills to get this right, but if you edit this and you play a note first, even if it's just a tiny fraction before, you can make sure that a particular note is the first one to get played. So we can look at this here. So let's just put this on first in. And then we're going to edit this part here. Now, if we zoom in at the beginning, I'm just going to move the arpeggiator out of the way. So let's say we want the E to be the first note. Then what we'll do is we're just going to turn snap off, and then I'm just going to edit those other ones so they're just a little bit later. So we probably, well, it's more accurate than if I played the keyboard, let's put it that way. Now, if we play that now, because first in is there, that one, you can hear that note is first because that was the first one to get played. And you may find that by doing this and then playing it live, the variations that you do on your keyboard will allow you to get some variation in the sequence and it will be more interesting. Finally here, we're going to take a look at the velocity. So this is just whether or not it passes the velocity through that you play. So for instance, if I play really gently, take that off there. Or if I hammer it, that goes through. Or you can do it to a fixed value. So here the velocity is set to 100 and it doesn't matter if I play gently. Hopefully you can see that when I'm caressing the keys on the screen. Or I'm absolutely hammering them from 3 miles above. It's exactly the same. So again, maybe if you have keyboard skills issues, as I certainly do, then you can use this to even things out and control them live. Definitely a case of experimenting with the different directions because there's so many available, but classic mode is actually pretty useful. There are presets. So you can see a lot of these will use those. So here, this is, for instance, a 303 ARP. Probably need to be on a more 303-like sound, but it's worth experimenting with the presets because you'll find some things that you never thought of because there are literally hundreds of thousands of combinations available here. Next, we're going to take a look at sequence mode. So you'll see as you flip over to sequence mode, if we go back to classic mode, the window gets wider, so there are more options available here. We're going to take a look at a few of them. It's certainly worth experimenting with sequence mode because I think this is where the interest comes from this. Now, this doesn't have all the features of some third-party arpeggiators, one of which in particular I'm going to look at in a future video, but this is certainly worthwhile, particularly if you're stuck in a situation where these are the only ones available to you, and it has some interesting features. So what this does is this generally will use a MIDI sequence, which either you can create your own or you can use one from a preset, and it will use that as the logic behind how the arpeggiator works. So let's just load up a preset and see if I can get a copyright strike. So under the presets here, under factory presets, under triggered phrases, we're going to go to pop sequence 1. Points for finding this one. I'm just going to move the keyboard down by an octave and so I'm not going to play that anymore. I think I'll probably get a copyright strike anyway for that. So there are a variety of triggered sequences available. Probably all of them are copyright infringements in some way or another, but certainly Tech Sequence 5 is one that's pretty recognizable. Yeah, you get the idea with that, hopefully. So let's see if I get away with that. If I don't, I will edit this bit out and you'll know why it's suddenly disappeared and I've re-released a video. So let's take a look at this in a bit more detail. So this left-hand side is the same as the classic mode. So if we switch between the two, you'll see none of that is changing, but this right-hand side is the key. Now, I think the most important part is this section here because you're probably going to want to create your own sequences. So first thing to do is to make sure we are in always on top. So you can right-click or two-finger tap in this sort of area here and then make sure that's ticked. If it's not, you won't be able to drag on to here because when you go to drag your MIDI part, the effect disappears, which isn't what you want. So I'm going to reopen that, make sure always on top is there. And then now if I want to drag any MIDI onto here, I can do so. So I'm just going to initialize this. So you can see there's no, smoke and mirrors, etc., making this work. So moving this down here just to make the dragging easier. So I've just made a pretty straightforward blues scale bass riff. So I'll just play this with no arpeggiator on it. You get the idea with this. So the first thing we need to do is to drag this into this area of the sequencer. So I'm just going to pick this up, and as soon as you do that, you see there's a slight change in this and it says drop MIDI sequence. So I'm just going to let that go there. And importantly, if you've named your part, it will say blues bass riff or whatever it says. So if it's just named after the track, so if they're all just all called trigger MIDI, you'd never know which one you put on there. So name your part and then drag it on. It's analyzed it. It says there's 8 pitches in there. There's 32 triggers. So in other words, there's 32 notes in total. And we're ready to go. So we're going to look at the different modes that you can play this in now. So this is still on this track here. So I'm just going to take the solo off there. These play modes are important. So we're going to run through these because these are where the real variation is. So first thing first is trigger. What trigger does is it plays the pattern that you've just put in. It will play it based on the note that you first play. So if the first note you play is the same as the pattern originally was, it's going to play in exactly the same way. So on screen you can see the keyboard. I'm just going to play just this one note. And you can hear it's been transposed by an octave. And it just repeats that. And we can do a blues. Obviously it's passing velocity, so you can hear that it's a bit quiet. Back down to this one. And you can hear there's a bit of a jump in there because I didn't play it in time. Obviously if you'd done it accurately, you'd be fine. So that's just playing that from the start every time you play a key, which may be what you want. But the next mode allows you to continue the pattern. So this is trigger continue. So what we'll see is when we're playing that same kind of thing, I'll just skip to the next bit. I'm not going to play this first one again. and you hear the riff. So you can hear that that played the second part of it when I played the C there. So it's continuing that pattern. So if you want to get that kind of live performance of this going, this is a good way to do it. So these next modes are a little more complicated because of the way that they work. So we're actually going to change the riff which is being used. So I've got a fairly straightforward 4-note pattern here. So we're going to put this on. So again, just drag this onto here and you can see it's analysed that. It's put 4-note pattern in. So again, if we were in trigger mode, it would just play that from scratch. But that's not what we want. We're going to look at sort normal. So this is more like an arpeggiator kind of mode. Now, if I just play the one note, here, what it's doing is it's analysing what you play and then it's matching it up to the pattern you've put in. So because here there's only this one note here and then an octave apart, that's all we're hearing. So if I open this up in the editor, the notes that we'll hear played are these ones here and these ones here because they are both Cs. So if I play a C here, it wouldn't matter if I started on a D. So in fact, I'll start on a D. So you can hear that's shifted by an octave and weirdly it's down an octave. So we're just getting those. Now, if I play 2 notes on the keyboard, I'm going to get these ones and this as well. Yeah, so we're going to get 2 different pitches in what we're playing and it will pick that up. So if I play a C, no, let's play a D and an F. Let's go crazy. So you can hear those are getting played. And if I play 3 notes, you can imagine it's going to play these ones as well. So the only bit that will be missing is the 4th beat. As soon as the MIDI sequence you've put in is complicated, this gets a little difficult to understand. So that's why I've used this simple example to show you what's happening. Now, the modes here are, I think all these are sort of variations. I'm not sure there's a huge amount of difference between them depending on what material you've put in. So sort first, what it does is it fills in the gaps. So if I play just 2 notes on here where we would originally have got these 2, this one, and this one here, so we'd have just got those, it will now fill them in with the first note that I played, so the D will get played for all the other ones where there would have been gaps. So we get a different feel again, and obviously if you had something more rhythmically interesting, that would work better. Sort any will put in something else from the arpeggio, so it's not vastly different depending on what you're playing. So in this case, it's filling it in with the F rather than the D, but it will fill it in with something else. And then the ARP style, that does something similar. It fills in with another note from the arpeggio. And generally, while I've been playing around with this, I haven't found a great deal of variation. There's certainly not a knockdown example that shows it different, but it's doing the same there as the previous one. So you might want to play around with those. It will depend on the MIDI sequence you've got here and the chords that you're playing on the keyboard. There's a fair bit of variation, but I think generally if you go to sort first and it's not really doing what you want, you'll probably find that these aren't going to be drastically different. But if this is near, then you can play around with that, etc. Now, repeat mode is something which we've seen in a previous video, the video on polyphonic arpeggios, which is the best description I could give for them. But basically, it's sort of not arpeggiating, really. It's playing the rhythm of whatever you've put in with the chords that you're playing. So we'll just take a quick recap on that. I've got this trance gate pattern here. I'm just going to drag that onto there because that's a more interesting rhythm. But again, if I play this here, it's just going to play. it's just playing the chords that I'm playing, but with the rhythm of this particular part. So you can see I've got this sort of 16th note trancey kind of pattern in there. That's great fun to play around with. And we can look at these other variations here in a second with that. Finally, voicings. If we go back to the 4-note pattern, there's not a huge difference between this and these other 4 modes here. I'm sure there is when you play around with it enough, etc., but it's not one of those things where it's drastically different. So for me, there's really 3 modes. There's the trigger mode, there's the repeat mode, and then there's these other ones which provide variations which may or may not be what you're looking for. Now, let's take a look at these settings here. So first things first, let's put the bass riff back in. So here we're back to being in our blues bass riff. And we're going to go back into trigger mode. So this allows you to make some variations to it. So you can see here at the moment, the step size is from the sequence because that's the mode we want to be in. But we can set it back to any particular value by clicking here. And then you can set it, in this case, it's set to 16ths. So if we play now, you'll see it's not respecting the rhythm of that part at all. It's just playing through the notes very quickly. In this case, in 16ths. So it's one of those things where you might find, oh, I wonder what that part would sound like if I just played through it without any gaps between there at all. I just played all of the notes. This is a quick way to do that. The length works in exactly the same way. But what I think is interesting about this is you can pick the length separately from that. So we can make all of these notes. So they're all 16ths. Whereas in the original, there are different durations. So you'll hear there's some bits are more legato. So that allowed you to modify this. So sometimes there's maybe some editing tasks you could do in Arpache, because if you have a long part, you could do that very quickly. So a quick demonstration of that is somewhere here. I've got the melody from Pachelbel's Canon. You probably know this. You probably heard that somewhere. So if we open the Arpache up again, and then this time put Pachelbel's Canon melody on there. Again, you can compress that by putting that on here, and maybe we'll put it on 30 seconds. And then now when we play this, so those extra notes are in there. So we're getting that kind of, always reminds me of cheesy sci-fi from the 70s, but that's when I grew up. So it's a bit like that. But compressing that kind of thing, you can do that really quickly. That would take you a while to edit. So you can see that obviously compressing these down and then moving all these over would be a little bit long-winded. So it's one of these things where you can experiment with the idea pretty quickly and then maybe get pretty much what you want by turning it to MIDI and then finishing your edits in the editor. So far with this, we've just been playing it in the normal order, in the normal direction. But you can reverse it. So you can get some new ideas by that, by doing it random, etc. Your mileage can vary considerably with this kind of thing, but it can be quite useful. Now, one of the things which I find useful with this is actually sending it to some drums. So often what you want in your arrangement is the drum part, percussion part, etc., to follow and lock in with the bass. Probably not 100%, but certainly you want a reasonable amount of that. So here I've got a Groove Agent track set up. We've got that set up with the blues bass riff. Now I'm just going to close the editor and open up Groove Agent so we can see what's happening here. So depending on the note that I play, you get something which fits rhythmically with what's already been played. So you can hear the rhythm of the bass on the cymbal. But if I play a different note, so that's in arpeggiator style. Now, if we go to trigger mode, now this is obviously something where what you do is going to vary considerably depending on what you play. But certainly rhythmically they should align. And we can hear the two together because I can set this one off as well. Make sure we're doing the same thing. So here you can see we're on trigger, blues, bass, riff, etc. And now by enabling monitor on this track or record, we can hear both. Now, obviously your mileage will vary and the key that you're playing on the keyboard is going to change what's happening on the drums, and you may not want that on your main riff track. Clearly you would probably do that by just recording it on the riff track and then playing back, but so for instance I quite like the way the open hi-hat there interacts with that, but maybe we'd want it in a different key. You can fix that. So if we go back to Halion Sonic 1 here, we can just use MIDI modifiers in this case. There's multiple ways we could do it, but in this case, I want to play a C on the keyboard, but get a D on the Halion Sonic track. So I'm just going to transpose this up by 2 just for the time being. And now when I play this, so that just gives you an option to use the arpeggiator in a way which is probably not obvious, I think, and it's something that, be honest, I stumbled upon and then thought, oh, that's quite useful. So using it in trigger mode is useful, and using it in repeat mode, because in repeat mode, you're just going to get the note you play. So generally in repeat mode, you will get what you play, but not always with Groove Agent. The reason being is that if I play it on, let's say, the snare, I'm just getting the snare, and you think that's fair enough. But if I play on the kick drum, we're getting some other stuff happening, and you think, whoa, what's going on there? And the reason is that the arpeggiator is producing not only just C1 here, but it's also producing C0. So if we go to the pattern mode, you'll see that this is getting triggered sometimes. So that's where those other notes are coming from. So whether or not you're happy with the happy accidents that occur, this is one of those things where there are a near infinite number of possibilities, because obviously if we were on a different kit, we'd get different results in terms of what patterns were happening, if there were any patterns at all, if you were using a different drum machine, if you're using a different sequence, yada, yada, yada. You can imagine we can't cover all the possibilities, but I just think that the using it on drum machines is quite an interesting way to get something which works pretty quickly. And then, of course, you would always burn it down to MIDI, as it were. So this is something I've covered in a couple of other videos, but I just want to recover it here so it's in this one place. So let's say we were happy with playing C and getting what we wanted on the drums, including that. So first thing we'd want to do is to burn this down to MIDI, as it were. So do a bounce. So what I'm going to do is just create the note that I want. So first thing, setting this part here. So just double click between the locators to create a part, and then open that up, and then I'm going to have the note which I'm playing, which you can see is C1 on the keyboard. So I'm just going to pencil that in. I'm not going to bother to record it. I'm just going to pencil in a C1 from the start all the way to the end. So you can see that starting at the beginning, ending at the end. Now when we play that back, so the first thing to do is to turn this into the MIDI, which has been generated by the Arpeggiator. Make sure your track is soloed and make sure your locators are set around the appropriate area. And then under MIDI, we're just going to do merge MIDI and loop. Make sure include inserts is turned on and then do OK. And as we can see, we've got these two parts which have appeared. You can see the chevrons there. And the merged is the one we want. So we're just going to move that original single note part out of the way. So now we can turn the arpeggiator off and we'll get the same effect. So that's quite useful, but maybe what we want to do is then take the notes that Groove Agent is creating. So if we just open up Groove Agent here, we can see that this is being sequenced, etc., that kind of thing. Now, if we add a MIDI track, let's close that down and get rid of the arpeggiator. Now, its input here, we can have our Groove Agent MIDI out there. So we're going to turn that on. So this MIDI track will be recording what's coming out of Groove Agent. So I'm just going to mute these other tracks so we don't hear anything else. And I'm just going to record all the way through. And we can see what happens. So we can see those notes coming out of Groove Agent. And now we've got that complete part. So we can see what's coming out of there. So we've got those. And importantly, that C0, which was coming out of the arpeggiator, isn't here. So this is the actual notes that Groove Agent was playing. So now we've got that. You can edit that. So let's say you wanted to change these hits. Maybe you wanted to remove the first one of those claps there. So let's just take that clap out and that clap out. So there's a bit of variation between the two hits, etc. And maybe we'll take that snare out as well. So that kind of thing. You've got total editing freedom, as you'd expect. And now we can then move this merge part, which was the original trigger, and we can put that onto Groove Agent MIDI, and we'll see when we play this back, and it will sound slightly different. Yeah. So you can record the output of Groove Agent and then start playing around with it. And that's a general tip for Groove Agent anyway, which is reasonably useful. Some other drum machines do this. I know that Contact allows you to record the MIDI out from it, etc. So this can be quite useful, sort of it's like reamping for guitars, but it's kind of re-MIDIing for MIDI. And it gives you complete freedom. So often with these techniques, you get something which is close to what you want, but it's not exactly what you want. And this allows you to edit it, use it as a starting point for your own editing, etc. So that's been a fairly in-depth and lengthy look at Arpache SX. I've definitely not covered every single feature in there because it's really deep and this video is already long enough, but hopefully you've seen that there's more to it than just playing sort of 90s, I'm off to a rave kind of arpeggios, and you can get something creative and musical out of it and add your own touches by adding MIDI in, etc. As ever, if you found this video useful, please like and comment, etc. It's all really useful. If you're new, have a look around. There's plenty of other videos like this on the channel, and please consider subscribing. It all helps keep me safe from our AI overlords as they appear over the horizon over the coming weeks. Anyway, hope you found this useful, and we'll see you again soon for more Music Tech Tuition.